Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Monday, January 12th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. The high in Riverside today is 61.6 degrees, with a low of 44.8 degrees, so expect a mild winter day with partly cloudy skies. Coming up, we'll examine the reasons behind President Trump's decision to tear down the White House East Wing and replace it with a lavish ballroom, and explore the ways Google and Walmart are revolutionizing shopping through innovative AI agents that handle everything from inventory to customer service. Plus, we'll cover other key developments in politics, tech, and beyond. All this and more on Alex's News. Stay tuned. This morning, we're looking at a huge construction push at the Trump White House, the biggest in generations. Reporter Ethan Miller is with us. Ethan, what exactly is the president trying to do here?
The Trump team is in the middle of a sweeping remake centered on the East Wing, and it is being billed as the biggest overhaul since Harry Truman basically gutted and rebuilt the mansion in the late 1940s. The core idea is to tear down the old East Wing and replace it with a massive new addition anchored by a state ballroom. On top of that, you have a proposed West Wing expansion, upgrades to the underground emergency bunker, and a series of changes to the grounds. The White House calls it, quote, a gift to the nation, end quote. But as the Washington Post and CBS News point out, it has triggered a storm of lawsuits, ethics probes, and preservation fights.
Let's start with that East Wing. What's already happened there and what's planned?
According to CBS News, demolition of the existing East Wing began in September of 2025 and was essentially finished by October, so that side of the complex is now gone down to the dirt. The project, which was first pitched at about $200 million last summer, has doubled to roughly $400 million as plans grew and costs climbed. Right now, as of today, January 12th, crews are focused on the below-ground foundation and bunker work. Above-ground construction is not supposed to start until April of this year, with the administration hoping to wrap up the whole thing by the summer of 2028.
How big is this new building, and what will that ballroom actually look like?
Plans filed with the National Capital Planning Commission, the NCPC, show a roughly 90,000 square foot addition, designed by architect Shalom Baranis after he replaced the original architect amid schedule pressure. This centerpiece is a roughly 22,000 square foot ballroom that the Washington Post says could seat between 1,000 and 1,350 guests, about 5 times the capacity of the current East Room. Reporting from Fast Company describes 40-foot ceilings, gilded finishes, bulletproof glass, and a so-called drone-free roof, along with an upgraded movie theater. The structure will be about the same height as the main executive residence, around 51 feet, and linked by a glassy 2-story colonnade, sometimes described as a bridge, with a new suite of offices for the First Lady built in.
How hands-on has President Trump been with this, beyond just signing off on blueprints?
Quite hands-on. Fox News, via AOL, reported that during an Oval Office meeting with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte on October 22nd of last year, the president actually pulled out glossy renderings of the ballroom to show off the design. He has floated naming the ballroom after himself, and has talked about hosting future presidential inaugurations there, saying it would end the need for what he called unsightly tents on the South Lawn for big dinners. Allies present this as the president personally curating a legacy space, while critics see it as a branding exercise built into the people's house.
You mentioned bunker work under the East Wing. How is security being used to justify this project?
The Washington Post reports that a major piece of the plan is upgrading the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, that Cold War-era bunker under the East Wing the presidents use in a crisis. Secret Service affidavits filed in court argue that once demolition began, the old protective systems were compromised, and that only by pushing ahead can they restore and enhance security. In a December filing cited by Fox News, a senior Secret Service official warned that the partially demolished site does not currently meet, quote, safety and security requirements, end quote, and that halting construction could put the president at risk. That security argument has been central in persuading at least one federal judge not to completely freeze the work.
All of this changes the look of the White House. What's the plan for the West Wing side?
To visually balance the much larger East Wing addition, the administration has floated what they call the Upper West Wing, essentially a second story built on top of the West Colonnade, that covered walkway between the West Wing and the residence. CBS News and the Washington Post say the idea is to add more office space for senior aides and possibly relocate some of the First Lady's team there, since their old wing is gone. That Upper West Wing is not under construction yet. It is still in the proposal and review phase. Architectural historians quoted in the Post and in design outlets like Wallpaper worry it would further bulk up the profile of the mansion and erode the familiar outline people know from photographs and television.
And outside the buildings themselves, people around D.C. have seen a lot of work in the gardens and nearby Parkland. What's changing there?
The Rose Garden has already been repaved with pale limestone tiles, replacing much of the grass, which the First Family and planners complained would get muddy during big events. People magazine and Elle Decor both reported that the look was inspired in part by the president's Mar-a-Lago estate. There is also a roughly $10 million proposal to swap out the aging brick walkways in Lafayette Park for granite, which the administration says will stand up better to demonstrations and heavy foot traffic, according to Global News. Trump has also personally paid for 2 very tall flagpoles, around 88 feet each, and imported marble and onyx for some interior finishes, which CBS News says he frames as patriotic, almost memorial-style donations. Preservationists counter that the cumulative effect is slowly turning the White House grounds into something closer to a private resort.
The White House keeps saying this is all privately funded and costs taxpayers nothing. How are they structuring that?
Money is being funneled through the Trust for the National Mall, which is the official philanthropic partner of the National Park Service for the mall and the surrounding area. The Washington Post reports that 37 donors and companies are on the official list released in October of last year, and together they have pledged around $400 million for the ballroom and related work. Big tech has heavily represented Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, Meta, and Google, along with YouTube, whose $22 million regulatory settlement was redirected from the Treasury into the project. There are also crypto figures, the Winklevoss twins, Coinbase and Ripple, and defense and finance heavyweights like Lockheed Martin, Palantir, and Blackstone's Steven Schwartzman, plus Trump himself, with at least one telecom giant, Comcast, stressing to The Verge that its gift is, quote, unrestricted and not tied to policy favors, end quote.
But there were new letters released on the Hill about how that money was raised. What do those show?
The tech outlet The Verge reported today, January 12th, that Senator Elizabeth Warren's office obtained correspondence showing that fundraisers working with the trust actively approached major tech firms soon after Trump announced the project, pitching both patriotism and access. Microsoft's legal team told Warren that White House allies reached out about 2 months after the announcement, inviting executives to a dinner for supporters that the company did attend. Amazon acknowledged that it had been in talks about donating since August of last year, before the donor list was public, though it says it did not review designs or ask for special treatment. Apple, Meta, and NVIDIA all responded with fairly cautious statements, saying they followed ethics rules but offering few specifics, and Warren has now introduced a proposal she is calling the Stop Ballroom Bribery Act to sharply restrict donations from federal contractors to such projects.
So the phrase, pay to play, is getting thrown around. What are watchdogs pointing to when they use that?
Groups like Public Citizen and Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, CREW, have tallied up how much federal business these donors already do. Public Citizen, cited by the Milwaukee Independent, says companies backing the ballroom hold more than $279 billion in federal contracts. CREW and other analysts note that Microsoft won major artificial intelligence and cloud computing awards in late 2025. As antitrust talk in Washington cooled, Amazon secured a multi-billion-dollar expansion of its government cloud work in December, and Lockheed Martin picked up a more than $4 billion missile contract in August. All around the same period, the biggest checks were coming in. The Washington Post also described a, quote, gold-plated dinner, end quote, on October 15th, where donors mingled with senior officials while hearing about coming regulatory rollbacks. There is no proven quid pro quo, but those timelines are front and center in ongoing ethics complaints and lawsuits.
You mentioned lawsuits earlier. Who's actually suing, and what are they arguing?
The National Trust for Historic Preservation, joined by some local groups, sued in early December, arguing that the administration blew past key laws, like the National Historic Preservation Act and the National Environmental Policy Act, by starting demolition before full reviews. CBS News and Courthouse News note that they want the court to force a proper look by the National Capital Planning Commission and the Commission of Fine Arts, which traditionally have a say on anything that changes the White House exterior. Preservation advocates also emphasize the loss of long-standing magnolia trees associated with Presidents Warren Harding and Franklin Roosevelt, and some have derided the new addition as, quote, McMansion style, end quote, dwarfing the roughly 55,000 square foot historic residence. Separately, there is litigation over whether demolition released asbestos and other hazards into the air without adequate safeguards for workers and nearby residents.
Where does all that stand today? Has any judge actually tried to stop the work?
In mid-December, U.S. District Judge Richard Leon strongly hinted he would not issue a full stop work order, partly because of the Secret Service's security concerns. But he was clearly uneasy about irreversible underground work racing ahead without proper oversight. According to Fox News and CBS, he ordered the administration to take its plans to the NCPC and warned that if they pour foundations that lock in a design the commission later rejects, the court could require them to tear it back out. The administration complied just before the deadline, filing detailed plans with the NCPC on January 8th. The panel is currently chaired by Trump advisor Will Scharf, which has raised questions about independence. Above-ground construction is paused until the NCPC's scheduled vote on March 5th, and Judge Leon has basically told the government, quote, proceed at your own peril, end quote.
The White House says the president has the power to do this anyway. What's their legal argument?
The administration points to a 1964 executive order that gives presidents broad discretion over improvements to the White House complex, along with exemptions and preservation laws that treat the residents differently from normal federal buildings. On that basis, the Council on Environmental Quality and the White House signed off on a so-called finding of no significant impact under the environmental law, arguing that the changes do not significantly harm the broader environment. Trump also took the extraordinary step in October of firing the entire Commission of Fine Arts, the body that normally weighs in on federal architecture, and replacing all its members with allies more open to the gilded, grandiose design. Senate records and CBS News both describe that as unprecedented. Attorney General Pam Bondi celebrated early court wins on social media and blasted what she called, quote, left-wing attacks, end quote. While Democrats like Governor Tim Walz and Senator Warren insist any major alteration to federal parkland around the White House should need explicit congressional approval.
Let's go back to that no taxpayer money claim. When you look closely, is that really true?
Only in the narrow sense that no direct construction line item appears in the federal budget. Because donations to the Trust for the National Mall are tax-deductible under Section 170 of the tax code, analysts cited by Time and FactCheck.org estimate that the Treasury could lose somewhere between roughly $84 and almost $150 million in foregone revenue. The Washington Post also notes that the $22 million YouTube owed in a settlement with regulators was rerouted from federal coffers to this project instead. On top of that, staff at the National Park Service, the White House Office of Administration, and the Curator's Office have spent thousands of hours managing the project, doing archival work, and helping create a digital twin of the building, all on regular government salaries, while the Secret Service is using its own taxpayer-funded budget to underwrite new bulletproofing, drone defenses, and temporary protection measures during construction.
And that Lafayette Park work is still drawing on normal park budgets too, right?
Exactly. Even as President's Park funding inside the National Park Service saw cuts of around $1 billion for the 2026 fiscal year, local reporting from outlets like KSL says those limited public funds are still covering parts of the Lafayette Park infrastructure upgrades that complement the privately funded ballroom project. Watchdogs argue that when you add up the tax breaks, the diverted settlement money, the staff time, and the security costs, the public is quietly absorbing a large share of the bill. That is why they say the repeated claim that this is cost-free to taxpayers is, at best, deeply misleading.
Put this in perspective for us. How does this compare to other big changes presidents have made to the White House?
Historically, the biggest structural intervention was Truman's Reconstruction, when engineers realized the house was literally at risk of collapsing and Congress approved about $5.7 million, in those days, money, for a total rebuild managed by federal agencies. Theodore Roosevelt's creation of the original West Wing in 1902 and later expansions were also taxpayer-funded and went through formal channels. More recently, even something as modest as Melania Trump's tennis pavilion in 2020 had to go through full NCPC and Commission of Fine Arts review, with public drawings and comments. As PBS and The Washington Post have noted, private fundraising on this scale has been reserved for memorials like the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, not for dramatically reshaping a sitting president's residence, which is why National Trust President Carol Quillen has called the new federal review process a, quote, necessary first step, end quote, but still warns that the damage to history could be irreversible if the project continues unchanged.
Looking ahead from this morning, what key moments should we be watching?
The immediate hinge point is that NCPC vote on March 5th, which will determine whether above-ground construction can proceed as designed or has to be modified. In parallel, the preservation and environmental lawsuits will move forward, and ethics complaints about the donor list and possible conflicts could lead to more document releases or even hearings on Capitol Hill. If the project survives those challenges, the administration still has to manage years of construction, with the goal of opening the new East Wing and ballroom in the summer of 2028, which would cement this as Trump's most visible physical legacy. However those legal and political battles shake out, this episode is likely to shape how future presidents, donors, and Congress think about altering the White House for a long time.
A lot to watch there in the months ahead. Ethan Miller, thanks for walking us through it. Our next story is about a huge new partnership between Google and Walmart that could change how we shop. Chloe is following it for us this morning. Chloe, what exactly did they announce yesterday in New York?
This is basically Walmart moving its store right inside Google's Gemini AI, the assistant you can already use on phones and in Google's apps. During a keynote at the big National Retail Federation show yesterday, Walmart's U.S. President and incoming CEO John Furner and Google's CEO Sundar Pichai said shoppers will be able to discover, personalize, and actually buy Walmart and Sam's Club products just by chatting with Gemini. CNBC reports that you won't have to leave the Gemini experience at all. You ask for ideas, refine suggestions, and then check out instantly. They're calling it the start of, quote, agent-led commerce, end quote, where the AI does much more of the heavy lifting.
When you say just by chatting, how would that work for a typical shopper using Gemini?
Imagine you open Gemini and type or say, help me plan a birthday party for a 6-year-old on a budget. According to CNBC's Melissa Repko, Gemini will pull real-time inventory, prices, and services from Walmart, suggest decorations, snacks, even a piñata, and keep refining options as you talk back and forth. When you're ready, you hit an instant checkout button, initially using Google Pay, and ABC News adds that PayPal support is coming soon. Behind the scenes, Walmart still runs the transaction through its own apps and sites, which analysts told Retail Brew helps keep customers comfortable that Walmart remains the merchant they know.
You mentioned this new Universal Commerce Protocol in your notes. What is that and why does it matter here?
Walmart's press release describes the Universal Commerce Protocol, or UCP, as an open standard that lets retailers plug their catalogs into conversational AIs like Gemini. It was co-created with big partners like Shopify, Target, Wayfair, and Etsy, and tech standards groups note it's open-sourced under an Apache 2.0 license on GitHub. Crone Consulting told Retail Insider it builds on familiar tools like OAuth 2.0, so merchants can, quote, integrate once, reach many, end quote, across different AI assistants and platforms. The upside is it can help smaller sellers get discovered in these AI chats, though antitrust officials like the Justice Department's Jonathan Cantor have warned, in comments cited by the Washington Times, that if Google controls distribution, it could still become a, quote, gilded garden, end quote.
For shoppers who link their Walmart accounts, how personalized does this get? And what do they give up in terms of data?
Walmart says personalization is central. If you connect your Walmart or Sam's Club account, Gemini can use your past purchases, your existing cart, your preferred store, and even your Walmart Plus or Sam's membership perks. According to Walmart's own announcement, that means it can remember that you buy gluten-free snacks or that you usually choose store pickup and adjust recommendations automatically. Analysts quoted by PPC Land and Aragon Research say UCP is designed so Walmart still stays the merchant of record, which limits how much raw transaction data Google actually sees. Still, privacy advocates note that any time you fuse purchase history with a powerful AI, you are betting a lot on both companies' promises about data use and security.
Once someone does buy through Gemini, how fast could they actually get what they ordered?
This is where Walmart leans on its huge physical footprint and logistics network. The company says hundreds of thousands of locally stocked items can arrive in under 3 hours, and in some test markets as fast as 30 minutes from nearby stores. ABC News reports that Alphabet's Wing Drone division is expanding its partnership with Walmart too, with about 150 additional stores joining the drone network by 2027, for a total of around 270 locations in cities like Los Angeles, Miami, Houston, Dallas, and Orlando. The idea, as Ferner put it in the press release, is to shrink the gap between, quote, I want it, end quote, and, quote, I have it, end quote.
How does this connect to the AI work Walmart was already doing with OpenAI and ChatGPT last fall?
This isn't Walmart's first experiment with chat-based shopping. Back in mid-October of 2025, about 3 months ago, Walmart launched an instant checkout feature inside OpenAI's ChatGPT, letting people buy certain items from Walmart and other merchants like Etsy, Skims, Vuori, Spanx, and Shopify sellers with one click, according to Walmart's earlier release. That rollout didn't include fresh food, and it was more about turning a product list into a quick purchase. CNBC notes Walmart also built its own in-app chatbot called Sparky, the yellow smiley face you see in its app, to answer simple questions. This new deal goes further. Walmart executives describe Gemini as a nacho-opal, agentic assistant that joins you earlier in the journey, helping dream up the ski trip or baby shower, and then quietly handling the shopping list.
So in practice, how is Gemini's shopping help different from what ChatGPT or Walmart's own Sparky were already doing?
People who tried the demos at the retail show told ABC News and tech sites like Medium that Gemini felt more like a true digital concierge. Thanks to Google's shopping graph, which tracks more than 50 billion listings, Gemini can check nearby Walmart inventory in almost real time, suggest substitutes if something is out of stock, and tailor ideas to things like your weather or family size. Retail Brew's early hands-on piece said it was noticeably better than the October ChatGPT experience at refining vague requests like, I'm hosting my in-laws this weekend, keep it under $100. And because Gemini is already on more than 2 billion Android devices and is seeping into Google Search through its AI mode, Forrester analysts told the Economic Times that Walmart is effectively meeting shoppers where they already are instead of forcing them into another app.
This all sounds like part of a much bigger arms race in online shopping. Where does this leave Google and Walmart in their battle with Amazon?
ABC News frames the Gemini deal squarely as a shot in what it calls the AI shopping war against Amazon and OpenAI. Amazon has been pushing its own Rufus AI assistant inside the Amazon app, and Futurum Group analyst Daniel Newman told Retail Insider he sees this Walmart-Google tie-up as a direct counter. Salesforce data cited by ABC shows that during the 2025 holiday season, AI influenced roughly $272 billion in global retail spending, around 1/5 of sales. Gartner's Kasi Sosha told the Economic Times that 2026 is likely to be the, quote, hockey stick year, end quote, where agent-led commerce really scales, and this partnership plants both Google and Walmart firmly in that race.
What does this mean for Walmart's business numbers and for its workers, especially with a leadership transition coming up?
Financially, Walmart is already a giant, For its fiscal year 2025, it reported about $681 billion in revenue and roughly 2.1 million associates worldwide, according to company filings. CNBC notes that Walmart's global e-commerce sales grew about 27% in its third fiscal quarter of 2026, helped by earlier digital investments, and this Gemini partnership is meant to accelerate that. There's also a leadership backdrop. John Furner, who co-announced this deal, is set to take over as Walmart Inc. CEO on February 1st, just a few weeks from today, succeeding Doug McMillon. McMillon has repeatedly warned, including in prior earnings calls, that AI will, quote, change literally every job, end quote, at Walmart. So this isn't just about revenue, it is about how work in stores and warehouses will be reshaped over time.
We've talked about personalization and convenience, but what are the main concerns experts are raising around this model?
Privacy and power are the big ones. To get the full benefits, you're encouraged to link accounts and share purchase history, which lets Gemini predict needs but also creates an incredibly detailed behavioral picture. And privacy advocates told AP News that consumers may not fully grasp that trade-off. Antitrust experts worry that even though UCP is technically open, Google could still favor certain partners or its own properties in search results and AI answers, making it hard for rivals to compete. At the same time, smaller merchants that plug in through Shopify told Retail Brew they welcome lower technical barriers but fear giving up direct traffic and brand recognition if most shopping starts and ends inside someone else's AI.
Are there limits on what you can buy this way right now, especially around groceries or fresh food?
At launch, there are some important constraints. Similar to Walmart's earlier OpenAI deal, ABC News reports that the first wave of Gemini shopping will not cover perishable items like fresh produce, meat, or dairy. It is more about general merchandise, household goods, and packaged foods. Payments will run initially through Google Pay, with PayPal expected to join soon. But other wallets are not in the mix yet. PayPal executive Mike Edmonds told ABC that fully autonomous, agentic commerce, where the AI goes off and buys things for you without every click, is coming, but in his words, not quite mature enough for broad rollout.
What kind of early feedback are we hearing from people who've actually tried Gemini shopping at the retail show?
Early testers at the NRF Big Show told ABC and sites like Medium that Gemini felt surprisingly intuitive, especially at handling messy real-world questions. One attendee described how the assistant built a camping checklist, refined it after they mentioned kids and a dog, and then filtered to items available for same-day Walmart delivery near their hotel. Tech outlet Retail Brew noted that carts synced cleanly between Gemini and the regular Walmart app, which helps avoid the feeling that you are juggling separate systems. In pilot markets where drones are active, some influencers who spoke to AP News said they actually saw 30-minute deliveries after using AI-built shopping lists, which made the whole thing feel pretty futuristic.
You mentioned global expansion earlier. How big could this get if everything rolls out as planned?
Walmart and Google are starting in the United States, sometime over the coming months. But both companies have signaled global ambitions. Walmart operates more than 10,750 stores in 19 countries and serves about 270 million customers each week. And company executives told CNBC they see no reason this agent-led model could not extend to many of those markets. International timing is still vague, but UCP is designed to support multiple currencies, languages, and tax systems, which makes scaling easier once local regulations are sorted out. So over the next couple of years, this could quietly change how millions of people abroad discover and buy everyday goods too.
Before we let you go, how are investors reacting to all of this right now?
Wall Street seems to like the story so far. According to real-time data compiled by platforms like StockTwits and Barchart, Walmart shares were up a bit more than 2% in pre-market trading this morning, to around $117, helped by this announcement and its recent inclusion in the Nasdaq 100. Analysts quoted by Aragon Research and the Futurum Group say the partnership both deepens Walmart's tech credibility and gives Google a marquee retail partner to showcase Gemini's capabilities. They also caution that execution will matter if the experience is clunky or if people do not trust the data practices. Shoppers can still fall back to old-fashioned apps and search boxes.
It sounds like we're seeing the early blueprint for how I might run more of our everyday shopping. Chloe, thanks so much for walking us through it. Here are some other headlines. Tensions between the United States and Iran are boiling over this morning, as a deadly crackdown on nationwide protests in Iran has left human rights groups counting more than 500 dead. Aboard Air Force One, President Donald Trump says he is considering very strong military options, even while claiming Tehran has quietly reached out to propose negotiations and that a meeting is being set up. He's warning he may act before any sit-down occurs. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi told foreign ambassadors that Tehran is not seeking war, but is fully prepared. For one, dismissing the protests as terrorist actions stirred up by the U.S. and Israel. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has been coordinating with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on potential intervention, with military and cyber options, possibly including strikes and efforts to restore internet access for Iranians, expected on the president's desk January 13th. Qatar is urging restraint to avoid a repeat of the 12-day war of June 2025, as Iran's clerical establishment faces its fiercest challenge in decades. In Southeast Asia, 2 countries are giving an AI chatbot a hard reboot. Indonesia and Malaysia have become the first nations to impose nationwide blocks on Elon Musk's Grok, after a surge in non-consensual sexually explicit deepfakes. Indonesia's Ministry of Communication and Digital Affairs announced a temporary ban Saturday, January 10th. Malaysia's communications regulator followed with similar curbs Sunday, January 11th. Officials, including Indonesian Minister Mahathir Hafid, call the move a preventative measure to shield women and children from digital-based violence, saying XAI has relied too heavily on user reports and too little on robust safeguards. The bans come as Grok's image tools are reportedly being misused to generate hyper-realistic pornographic images, triggering scrutiny in the UK, the EU, and India. XAI has shifted image generation to a paid tier on X, but regulators say that fix doesn't quite click. At the International Court of Justice in The Hague, history is in session. Public hearings have opened in the Gambia's landmark case accusing Myanmar of genocide against the Rohingya over 2017 military clearance operations. Gambia's Justice Minister Dada Jallow told judges the case is about real people and real stories, as lawyers prepare rare in-person survivor testimony in closed sessions later this month. Myanmar's ruling military junta, in power since 2021, denies any genocidal intent and is set to present its defense starting January 16th. It's the first full genocide merits hearing at the UN's top court in more than a decade, a legal litmus test that could take up to a year and shape reparations, Rohingya rights, and future cases such as South Africa versus Israel. To the Arctic, where the temperature is low but the stakes are high. British officials confirm London is in talks with NATO allies to beef up military presence in the high north amid rising Russian and Chinese activity. Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander calls it business as usual, despite reports the plans are partly meant to answer President Trump's renewed interest in buying Greenland. A proposed NATO mission could dispatch British troops, warships, and aircraft to Greenland, joined by Germany and France. With melting ice opening new sea lanes and resources, the chilly new front door of UK security, Prime Minister Keir Starmer's government plans to send 500 Royal Marines to cold response exercises in Norway, Finland, and Sweden this March, signaling that when it comes to Arctic security, Europe is not on thin ice. And in trade news, China and the European Union appear to be steering their electric vehicle feud toward a soft landing rather than a hard crash. On January 12, 2026, both sides announced a framework to defuse their dispute over EV import tariffs. The European Commission is inviting Chinese manufacturers to submit price undertaking, offers minimum import prices that would replace countervailing duties of up to 35.3% imposed in 2024. Beijing says exporters can sweeten the deal by pledging specific shipment volumes and future industrial investment inside the EU, signaling commitment to stable supply chains and World Trade Organization rules. Brussels will now assess proposals, objectively and fairly, over the coming weeks, in a bid to protect European automakers from subsidized competition while keeping Chinese EVs on the road and off the trade war scrap heap. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with GPT-5, Gemini Pro 3, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.